Hello everyone, this is Ashraful Arefin, and today in this video I am about to edit a street image in Photoshop and show you how I usually get the cooler tones and colors. So yeah, let's get started. So this is the image I'll be processing today, which I shot on a recent trip to Bangkok. So before starting, I'd like to mention a couple of things. I always shoot RAW and start by doing some basic corrections in Adobe Camera Raw. One of the questions I get is how I make my images to look like noiseless, clean and banding free. The answer is I try to use a lower ISO while shooting, and I always edit in 16-bit. It just gives you so much freedom in the editing, and you can check these settings here in Camera Raw. So if you just go here in the lower end of Camera Raw, you'll see these options. If you just click here, in this pop-up window you can select all the options. For depth I'm selecting 16 bits channel, and for my color space I always use Adobe RGB. Hit OK. As you can see, I have shot this image way underexposed, and the reason is to get this nice soft detailed highlight area. Since I always shoot RAW, I can bring back the details in shadow areas, but if I get a harsh highlight, something like this will be harder to get rid of in Photoshop. So now we can start by doing some regular basic adjustments, but before I do that, I'll go to this lens correction, and here I'm just doing some regular adjustments like remove the chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. From here I'll keep the distortion to 0, and here in the manual I can defringe it, but I'm not really seeing any fringes over here, so I'm just keeping it the way it is. And next I'm going to the basic corrections, and here I'm going to increase the exposure. I think I'll keep it around 70, and I will keep the highlights down so that I can still get the nice details like this here. But I won't go too much because then it will create some bad fringes around the edges. So just very minimum, not too much. And next I'm going to bring back the details in shadows. I'm increasing the shadows, not too much though. I want to keep the dramatic lighting and contrast, and we'll brighten the blacks a bit. I don't think it needs additional clarity or something, so I'm just keeping it like that. I can later sharpen it in Photoshop. And for the temperature I will probably add a bit more blue and a bit of green tint. Okay, I think I'm happy with it. I will just open the image now in Photoshop. So now we are in Photoshop, and as always I will start by duplicating my background layer, and to do that I'll press Ctrl J or Command J on a Mac, and this will duplicate my layer. This is just to make sure that my main layer, which is the background, it stays untouched, and I can always go back if I want to make any adjustments or if I do any mistakes. So before starting to color grade, I'll look for the problem areas and distracting things which I need to get rid of. And here I can see there are some unwanted colors like these reds and blues in the background, and minor things like this part of a body of another person, and this blue thing, I think it was a broom or something, and this little white spot over her shoulder. These are just the minor things I always look for and take care of, because I want to make sure that nothing distracts the eyes of my viewers from the subject. I'll start enhancing the lighting first and then move on to the coloring part. You can use any tool you want. I'm just using the tools I'm comfortable with and I know. So I'm going over here in the adjustment layers panel, and from the options I'm selecting curves. So I am here in the curves menu now. I don't really need to work with light in the background. I really like the way it is. I just need to enhance the light in my subject to make her more visible and bring out those details. So if we zoom in, so we can see that there's a nice lighting on her face, and I'm just going to enhance it and increase it a little bit. So here in the curves menu, this is the highlight portion, this is the mid-tone, and the darkest part is the shadow area. So since we need to work mostly with the highlights and mid-tones, I'm just going to enhance them at first. So I'm going to increase the highlights. Not too much, maybe just a bit here. And keeping the shadows down. Okay. Now, as we can see, the adjustment we did is actually affecting the whole image, and we only want this to affect our subject. So now I have to apply a mask over it and bring back the adjustment only to the parts where I want. To do that, first I will fill this layer mask attached to the adjustment layer with 100% black. Since it's already white, I can simply invert it to black by pressing Ctrl I or Command I on a Mac. Now to bring back the adjustment, I just have to paint white on the mask. I'm making sure that my foreground color is selected as white. Now I'm selecting the brush tool by pressing B on keyboard, and I'm going to paint over the areas where I want the light. So I'm just zooming in, resizing my brush size, and I'm just going to paint over. Here's one tip. While masking and brushing, you can change the hardness of the brush according to the sharpness of the edges. For example, for masking out defocused and softer edges, I would use a softer brush and a sharper brush for more sharp and in focus areas. You can simply do that by right-clicking, and from here you can select the size and hardness of your brush. And now I'm going to get rid of the unwanted objects in the background. So first I'm creating a merged layer, and to do that I'm pressing Ctrl, Alt, Shift and E, or Command Option Shift and E on a Mac. And I'm going to select the lasso tool, and I'm going to select this little thing. and I'm going to fill it with content aware filter. I'm pressing shift and delete, and if content aware isn't selected, you can just select it from the drop down menu. I'm selecting content aware and opacity 100%, more normal, and hit OK. I'm also going to read off this part of the body of another person same way. Let's see what Photoshop does. I'm selecting it and shift delete, content aware, OK. So Photoshop did a really nice job here, but there are some parts where I think it's not looking very realistic. So we can just simply clone stamp it, or using brush tool I can paint over it and blend it with the background. I'm selecting the brush tool. I'm just going to make it look like it's in the shadow. So I'm just selecting a color from the shadow areas, and I'm creating another layer here. I'm just going to paint over it. And I'll decrease the opacity. Now I can change the blending mode to multiply. This will make the layer blend with the background. And change the opacity a little bit more. I'll do a little bit here and there. For example, here, changing the opacity. I'm just hiding some brighter areas and something that I find distracting. I'll do the same thing here in this area, these white patches and highlight areas. I will decrease the brightness a little bit just by doing this. I can do this in the same layer, but I personally like to do it in different layers so that I can make changes very easily. So I'm creating another layer, selecting the brush tool, picking a color somewhere around here, and simply going to brush over. And changing the blending mode to multiply. And if I feel like I have overdone it, I can simply decrease the opacity. I'll keep it around 40. Okay. Also, I'll decrease the reds in the background so it doesn't distract the eyes. And I can do this in many ways. For now, I'm going to adjustment layers and creating a selective color layer. And here in selective color, I'm choosing reds. And here I'm adding more cyan to red. And decreasing magenta. Also decreasing the yellow. And black. Okay. Same way, I'm going to invert the layer mask. Selecting the brush tool, painting white over the areas where I want. So now that we are done with the lighting, let's move on to the coloring part. So I have already decided to go with cooler tones and I want some sort of greenish blue tone to it. The reason is I want to create a tone which is calm and complements my subject. Also, I wanted to capture the dark and cool atmosphere of that particular alleyway. So I'm going to use the colors which will help me achieve that. Instead of trying different tones and settings and see what works best, I like to have a vision and work towards that. And I'm mostly going to work on the backgrounds and overall in the mid-tones. And I'm not really going to change much to her because I personally believe that human skin should look like human skin with all the details and the colors. So mostly I'm going to work on the highlights and mid-tones and the lighting part. So let's start by creating a curves adjustment layer. And here in curves, if you go to this drop down menu, RGB, if you click here, from here you can choose every channels and work on them individually. So first I'm going to select red and I'm going to decrease reds from the highlights here. I'll make small changes, not too drastic. I'll keep the mid-tones same, just working on the highlights now. Maybe a little bit. And I'm going to blue and increasing the highlights. And a bit of green. Okay. Next I'm going to create a selective color adjustment layer. And this time I want to make the greens here a bit more bluish. So I'm going to first yellow because there are yellow in it. I'm adding more cyan to it, adding a little bit of magenta and decreasing the yellows a bit. So this also affecting the whole image, which I don't want. I only want the effect in this part. So same way, I'm just going to invert it, the layer mask, and brushing over the parts where I want the effect. I'll open the selective color layer again, and this time I'm going to greens, and here I'm adding a bit more cyan and a bit of magenta and adding a little bit of yellow. Okay. Next I'm going to add a color balance adjustment layer, and here first I'm going to the mid-tones and I'm going to add a bit cyan and a bit of blue and okay. I can see that I am close to the tones I want. This is also affecting the whole image. I don't want her clothes or skin color to be affected by it, so I'm simply going to paint black to remove some of the adjustments, making sure my foreground color is black. Now I will add more reds and yellows to her skin, and this will just create that contrast and make her pop a little bit more. So I'm going to create another color balance layer, and this time in the mid-tones I'm going to increase the reds, also going to increase the yellows and a bit more green. And now I'll do the opposite. I will select the layer mask, invert it, select the foreground color as white, and going to brush over her skin. Now I'm going to increase the brightness a little bit. I can do this by creating a brightness contrast layer. And here I'm just going to level up the brightness and a bit of contrast. I want to remove some of the adjustment from this brighter part because I want to keep it soft. Selecting black and painting over the layer mask just to bring back these details. So now I will add a bit more brightness and color depth to her skin. So I'm going to create another selective color adjustment layer, and this time I'm going to work with the reds. So I'm decreasing the cyan, that means adding more red, and decreasing a little bit of magenta, and a bit of black. Okay, and I'm going to invert and brush over only to her skin. I would probably make her a bit more bright and add more contrast to her. So I can just go to brightness and contrast, add a bit of brightness and contrast, invert it and brush over the parts where I want. I can also duplicate the layer to increase the effect and maybe decrease the opacity a little bit. And the advantage of having a layer mask attached to it is that you can always go back and make changes as you need. Now I'll probably add a bit more blue to the shadow areas, so I can simply go to color balance. And here from the drop down menu I'm selecting shadows, and I'm just adding a little bit of blue and maybe a bit of cyan. Okay, and same way I'm going to invert it, taking the brush tool, selecting the foreground color as white, and going to paint over the areas where I want. I'm simply adding a vignette, but using the color. Instead of adding a plain black vignette, this actually creates more depth and natural look. Now I will probably add a bit more vibrance to these lips, just to add a bit more color depth. I don't want to make it look like I just added a filter. There should be some color differences and depth to make it look like more natural. So I'm going to selective color, and I'm going to the greens, and I'm going to increase the yellows. Okay. And invert it, brush tool, and I'm going to brush over there. Now it's looking pretty good to me. I'm just going to add a misty effect here in the highlights area just to blend it even more and make it look even more softer. So I'm creating a new layer. I'm going to my gradient tool here, and here in gradient tool, if you click here, make sure that the foreground to transparent option is selected. Hit OK, and I'm keeping the opacity around 14%, and in the foreground color I'm going to select something similar to the highlight area. If we drop the color picker, I can see the color range here, and I'm selecting a bit more blue, maybe this, and OK. And from the gradient menu, I'm selecting the radial option, which is the second one, and I'm simply just going to drag over these areas. Just to add a little bit of lighting effect and misty effect. I can always change the opacity here, and from the blending modes I'm selecting screen. This will blend the lighting effect with the main image. Now this is totally optional and something very personal. I really like this look, and you can achieve this in camera using a mist filter. There are lots of options available online. Tiffen makes some really great mist filters. I personally like to create it in Photoshop because when you use a mist filter, it also decreases the sharpness of your image, just to give you that cinematic misty look. And since I want to keep the sharpness, I create this in Photoshop. So let's see the changes we have made so far. So this was the before, and this is the after. At this point I'll take a break and get back to the image with fresh eyes and try to see what are the changes I need to make, and if I made any mistakes or something. So yeah, that's basically how I do it. Now I'm going to show you how I save my file to upload on Instagram or other social medias. So first I will go to layer and flatten image, and then I'm going to duplicate the layer again, pressing Command J or Ctrl J on Windows. And here I'm going to filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. And here I'm going to increase the amount to maybe 65, and I'll increase the radius also. Make sure you don't go overboard because that will create lots of noises and fringes, which is not a good look. So I'm keeping it like this. And I'm going to create a layer mask, invert it, and painting white over the areas I want the sharpness to take over. Once I'm done, I'll go to layer and flatten image. And next I'm going to image size, and I'll keep the resolution 72, and I'll make the width to 2000 pixels and hit OK. This is my personal settings. I find it works very well for me. I haven't seen any quality loss on Instagram using these settings, and I have added the sharpness only for Instagram because Instagram kind of decrease the quality and the sharpness in your images, so adding this extra sharpness helps to maintain the quality. So once I'm happy, I'll go to File, Export, and Save for Web. And here in this box, I'll check the quality to 100 and select JPEG and check the box Convert to sRGB and then click Save. And that's it. That's how I create my cooler tones. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed it and learned something from it. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section, and I hope to see you in the next video. Till then, stay safe and well.